Hi everyone, this is Mike Selvey welcoming you to the last of our dressing room reunions. This time we start in 1975 and go backwards into the Neolithic era really, with some of the Middlesex stars from back then. Then we've got Peter Parfitt, whose connection with the club goes back to 1954, and he's still got his own hair by the looks of it. We've got Clive Radley, who seems to be appearing in all these reunions for some reason. Still playing Bucks, he must be. We've got Harry Latchman, who completes a trio of past presidents there. We've got John Price, who curled his way in from the pavilion end in such a familiar way and delivered his rockets. And we've got Ted Clark, whose career finished in the mid-60s, but was briefly revived in a memorable fashion, Ted, about a decade later. I'm sure we'll hear about that later. That's 1,515 first-class matches between them all. Parth, let's start with you. What was it like, Parth, back in the 50s when you joined? What was the club? What was the club like then? Well, how did you join the club anyway?
Well, I was obviously in awe. I came up from Norfolk, and I was very quickly branded by John Murray as a carrot cruncher. And I came up in 1956, and I had the great pleasure, obviously, at the age of 19, of playing with Bill Edridge, Jack Robertson, and indeed the great Dennis. And of course, the great Leslie Compton. And one of the first lessons I learned, I went into the dressing room and I hung my blazer on Les Compton's peg. I'm going to show you that was the last time I did it. We were a good side. I wouldn't say we were a championship winning side. Compo was just recovering from a knee injury. I played one game. I played 3 games with him, but one game I played with him was at Glastonbury, and he was on one leg, and I went into bat. And when I went into bat, he was 10. An hour and a half later, he was 115, and I was 7. It was the most fantastic performance I've ever seen. And I can remember Colin McCool bowling to him, and because he bowled leg breaks and googlies. And Compo would go up the wicket to him. And if it was a leg break, he used to smash him through extra cover. If it was a googly, he used to whack him through mid-wicket. And, well, I learned then, very early in my career, that clearly here was an exceptional talent.
It's interesting, isn't it, Compo, because we hear a lot about Compo. There's a lot of myth about him, Parth, isn't there? But actually, you know, when I speak to Harry Sharp about him, he was always saying, well, he was a proper player. He didn't sweep every ball, and he didn't come in with a dinner jacket on and take it off and go out and bat with a bow tie. You know, he was a proper player. He played proper innings.
No, but I have to say that I was 12th man several times when he was playing, and although I used to embellish the story about him coming in a dinner jacket, I didn't see him do that. But I did see him come in at 5 20 past 11 and then ask what we were doing, whether we were batting or whether we were bowling. And I can remember one game, he came in late and he asked me what we were doing. He said, "What are we doing, 12th?" I said, "We're batting, Mr. Compton." And he got changed, he put his pads on and got on his settee and went fast asleep. And I forget when he was in, but anyway, somebody got out and I had to go to him and say, "Mr. Compton, you're in." And his first words were, "Who's got a bat I can borrow?" Now, bearing in mind that he'd been under contract to Slazenger's for about 15 years, and they used to bring him 6 bats every April for him to go through and look. Well, of course, they were nicked, weren't they, by various people. And he never had a bat. Well, he got hold of one out of Fred Titmus's bag, and Fred Titmus, immortal words, said, "Compo, you can't take that out. I bought it in the naffy." How many he got, I don't know. I'll tell you a story about Radley as well. The little rat, I'll tell you about him. I don't know what year it was, but we were playing Northants at Lord's, and we had to score quite quickly to win the game, and we were doing very well, and it came halfway through the afternoon. We were well in front of the clock. I was 95 not out. And Radley came to the wicket. We needed 11 to win, and he scored all bloody 11 runs, he did.
The phrase these days is being alert, isn't it? You can stay alert. And the only time in life I've had to be really alert was when Parfitt was on 0 or 99.
I only batted with you a couple of times, Bugs. The first time was in a Sunday League game out in the Surrey Sticks somewhere, Byfleet. I can remember it exactly.
Yeah.
We were chasing a thing, and I came out to the middle, so it must have been quite late on in the game, and Bugs was still in. And the first thing he said to me, "What's a posse? What's a posse?" I said, "What do you mean? What's a posse?" He said, "How many have we got?" I said, "What do you mean? How many have we got?" He said, "Oh, I don't look at the scoreboard." I said, "Well, that's a great idea. And when you're chasing in a run chase, you don't know how many we've got. It's a good job I've come out, really."
A bit of a daft superstition for a cricketer, really, not to look at the scoreboard.
Given that you know how many you've got to the precise decimal point, Bugs, for your entire career.
Anyway, I've got a list here of everybody who was playing in '65. There was 24 on this list. That was your debut year, yeah? Yeah, it was actually. Yeah, I was there.
He's going to tell you he got 100 against the South Africans. That's all.
I wasn't going to bring that up, but that's very kind of you to bring it up. Just to be serious for a minute, 24 there were. 12 of those aren't still with us, and 12 are. And I wondered if there are a couple on that list that I'm not too sure about. And I wonder. Harry told me yesterday, in fact, that Tony Waite, do you remember him? He's still all right. Is he still around?
Yes, he's doing well.
The only other one I don't know, Chalky White, Harry.
Not heard from Chalky, but I spoke to Tony yesterday afternoon, and he's doing well. He's a secretary of a golf club on the Isle of Wight. Sadly, he's got a bad back and he's unable to play, but he's still in charge of the golf club. So he's doing okay. And Chalky White, I've never heard from him since the day he left Lord's, which is very sad. He took it badly, but there you are.
I met Knocker. Knocker White.
Chalky. Roger White.
No, not Knocker. Roger White.
Left arm spinner.
Oh, didn't know him.
He was probably on the staff when you were captain, Parth.
Yeah, don't worry about that.
Roger White.
Yes, Roger White, left arm spinner.
No, I can't recollect.
Manasseh. Do you remember Manasseh?
The Mauler?
Yeah, the Mauler.
Yeah, I remember him. Well, what's he got to do with Roger White?
They were the two in '65 that we didn't know where they were.
Did Chalky White come off the MCC staff?
Yes, he did. Yes, he joined the MCC staff in 1960. And he, myself, Tony Waite, and one or two others were there for several years.
I remember Jim Aldis, who I don't think ever came on the Middlesex staff, but he certainly played one game for Middlesex at Andover.
1970, he played 2 games.
Yeah, I know, but I know that because I didn't bowl him it was at Basingstoke, and I didn't bowl him, and I got a bollocking from Charlie Robbins. What he knew about it, I really do not know.
Sport, when did you join? 61?
I played in 61 as an amateur.
Did you indeed?
I had to take my 14 days holiday from the AA to play those games. I was offered a contract at the end of the season. I said, could I just start the next season, and if it goes well again, I'll sign a contract. And it got to April '62, and I had to have my appendix out. So I hardly bowled at all that year, but the county came back to me at the end of '62 and said, would I sign a contract? And I thought, well, I've got to give it a go. So I signed a contract. I was lucky. I played the first game in '63, every game in '63. And then amazingly, before I got my county cap, I'd been picked to go on the England tour to India that winter.
So what about you, mate? You, at the time you were playing cricket, were you pursuing other avenues at the same time?
I played my first game in '59, which in its own way was quite amusing because Patsy Hendren was our scorer. He was getting on a bit by then. It was quite hot. And I went out, they shuffled the order in the second innings. I went out, and while I was taking guard, the famous club cricket shout came out, "Batsman's name, please." Well, I thought that was a nice, easy way to start my career.
Walter, can I tell a story about Ted?
You don't have to ask me, Puff.
Right. Well, I think it did start in 1959, and we were playing Hampshire at Portsmouth. And of course, Hampshire had one or two good cricketers, not least, of course, the great Derek Shackleton. Well, just before lunch, the 2 balls before lunch, Ted whacked him for 4, and then the last ball before lunch, he hit him straight back over his head for 4. And when he came into the pavilion, John Waugh, the captain, said to him, "Edward, don't you think that perhaps the last over before lunch, it would have been slightly more wise to have played the over out instead of risking yourself getting out?" He said, "Well, I thought I ought to get on with it, Captain, because that chap Shackleton would come on after lunch."
Ted's nickname was Stingray.
Stingray.
He went out to bat. Anything could happen in the next half hour.
That was given to me by the Surrey boys, wasn't it? There was another story of that same match at Portsmouth, it was, Hampshire. And Peter Sainsbury came on the bowl, and I thought he was an off spinner. And it wasn't until he bowled 3 balls, I realised he was bowling with his left arm.
It helps to know what you're doing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Clive will remember this, I think. I played against Pakistan at Lord's, Pakistan tourist one time. I had a problem. This is gospel truth. Once I volunteered with Brealers. We were batting in at the Wacker. And at one end was a bloke called Tony Mann bowling, bowled leg spin. And the other end was Dennis Lilly warming up for the centenary test. And I was out there trying to save a game with Brealers, and I volunteered to face Dennis Lilly because I got no chance against Tony Mann. So that's me and leg spin bowling, you see. So we played Pakistan in the first innings. I was at LBW Intercard, North, first ball. So the second innings I went out and little Mushy was bowling. The Mushtaq Mohammed was bowling, and I had to go past him to get the crease, bowling pavilion end. And I went by him, I said, "Mushy, what are you going to bowl me?" And he said, "I'll bowl you googly." See, so I thought, yeah, right, okay. So I played for the leg break, and it spun through the gate and bowled me. So I got a king pair. And I said, "Yeah, Mushy," I said, "I can't even trust you to be devious." He thought, "I told you I bowl you googly," he said.
Did you know which way that went, Sel?
Well, I'm still trying to work it out. Yeah. It was the one that wasn't what I thought it ought to have been. Well, you were telling me earlier about Gubby at Lord's.
Yeah, I mean, ever present in that committee room, sitting on his stool with the window half up open, and everybody was very, very wary of Gubby. But I played my first second 11 game for the county. That would have been 1960. In those days, the second 11 were allowed to play one match out on the middle at Lord's, and I think it was a 3-day game. And we were playing Surrey, and Charlie Robbins was captain. And we bowl first, and I'm at the pavilion end, marching back towards Gubby, sitting in his on his stool in the committee room, and I marked my run up out, and I'm standing there, and I said to Charlie, who was mid off, I said, "Charlie, I haven't got the ball." he said, Charlie said, "Oh, don't worry about that." He said, "Just run in and pretend to bowl." And I thought, you know, here I am, my first game at Lords, and he wants me to run in and bowl without the ball. But I decided against it.
Gubby quite liked me. I'm never quite sure. It was like, you know, you couldn't get a more polar opposite than Gubby and I. But he quite took me. I used to spend quite a long time sitting, leaning on that windowsill, the committee room windowsill.
He thought you were a public school boy. What?
Oh, well, he did. That's gospel truth. He said, well, you're at school. He said, Michael. He called me Michael. Only Gubby and my mum, when she was pissed off at me, called me Michael. And Michael, he said, your school? He said, was it a good one? I said, well, we didn't have a boating song at Battersea Grammar School, Mr. Allen. No, but I think it was all right.
Well, you're lucky there, Self. I can't ever remember him speaking to me.
Harry, you joined in, what, 65?
Oh, no, 66.
66?
Yeah.
Okay.
Part way through the season, I think, round about July time, Middlesex was struggling to bowl teams out at Lords. And I was playing a game over at Rayners Lane somewhere with the young pros, MCC young pros, and I got a phone call asking me if I had a British passport and so on and so forth. And several messages went on and off the field over at Rayners Lane. And at the end of the day, I came off and spoke to Harry Sharp and Len Munster. And Sharpie said to me, pulling a one on his fag, he said, Latchman, go and get your bloody haircut. Which I did. And turned up at Lords the following day and made my debut against Glamorgan. It was very nice. It was a beautiful day. And we batted first, so I had plenty of time to take things in, listen to all the conversation, and keep quiet over in my corner. So it was a great day.
You'd have been playing with Fred, I suppose, were you, in that match? Were you?
Well, Fred, yes. Fred was my first county captain. And I've got to say that he looked after me very well.
I'm always curious about this kind of relationship between leg spinners. You know, it's quite difficult being a leg spinner on your own in the side, isn't it? You need the counterpoint.
Yes, it was difficult, and I think as time went by, to get info, I had to catch up with Jim Sims, who was our scorer at the time. And if you can catch Jim in the evening somewhere over a half a lager or a half a bitter, and with a 2-hour session to spare, you could have a chat with Jim, and he'd spend 2 hours talking to you, and you probably get 2 or 3 sentences of a real sense out of it. But it was great listening to Jim, and he was the only one really that could speak leg spin bowling in my early years with Middlesex. I think if I wanted to know more, I'd go down the bowlers' room where Harry Sharp and Len Munster was, and they obviously knew me from I was age of 16, and they knew how I wanted to play. They knew what I could do, and I got my sort of help from them, really.
Quite interesting what Harry was saying about bowling leg spin. Of course, Jim Sims played most of his cricket in the 40s and the 50s when Jack Young, as a left armer, used to bowl from the nursery end. And Jim nearly always bowled leg spinners from the pavilion end. And he bowled with a backward short leg.
Well, you see, it to me, Parth, it makes absolute sense. And I've had this thing forever about spinners actually by choice bowling from the wrong end at Lords, because it always seemed to me that if an off spinner was bowling from the nursery end, if it was turning, it would turn irrespective of the slope. That's minimal. But if it wasn't turning, then it would help the ball go away. And likewise, left arm.
In the 2 years I was captain, I once asked Fred if he'd bowl me an over at the nursery end to change the bowlers round. And his reply was, and it ended in off. And that's the last time I approached him.
Was that in part, and thought about this quite recently, actually. Was that in part due to the fact that he'd have been bowling down what is the prevailing wind, and therefore he had to be, if somebody's trying to hit him, they had to hit it into the wind, by and large?
Yes, yes, but he still bowled at the pavilion end, irrespective of where we were on the square.
Yeah.
For instance,
right.
if we were bowling at the bottom end, you know, one of the pitches at the bottom end, you'd think he'd want to bowl at the nursery end, wouldn't you?
I would, yeah.
But he never did. He never did. You could, well, I couldn't get him. Michael Brearley might have got him to bowl at the nursery end, but I certainly didn't.
I think, Clive, you've better memory of these things. I mean, I think I've seen him bowl from the nursery, and not very often, but I've seen him do it.
Yeah, he might have done it once or twice, but I can't honestly remember it.
You bowled both ends, actually, Sport. By and large, you bowled from the pavilion, didn't you?
Very much so. Used to share it with Fred, basically. Always believed in running downhill with the wind and with the tide.
Yeah. Did you see? Now's the chance for you to tell me here, because I've never asked you this. But your run, right, which everybody remembers, sports run. Whenever people talk about curving runs, they always talk about yours, and I always say, well, the business end of your run was actually gun barrel straight, wasn't it? And was the start of it a product of the slope, which gave you a little bit of momentum going down the hill?
I'll try and keep the story as short as I can. I think when I first played in '63, I had a fairly orthodox run-up. I got picked to go to India at the end of that season with England. Gubby Allen arranged between the end of the season and before we went for a long jump coach to coach me in my approach to the wicket. And we had a session down in the on the nursery at the end of the season with this long jump coach who had me running in gun barrel straight. I can't say I was that impressed. And by the time I came back from India, the run up had more or less been put in place, and it was strange. It was I was bowling badly without luck in India, and didn't get picked for the first test. And so I thought, well, what I'll try and do, I'll run a bit farther and a bit faster. And being a thinking quick bowler, I didn't want to walk back all that long way. So I thought, if I come in from over there, I won't have to walk. And then, of course, at Lord's, bowling from the pavilion end, you're making maximum use of the slope. You're running all the way. And sadly, it worked. And I was lumbered with it.
All of you played at Lord's with the Ridge, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Tell me a bit about that, because I can't even remember. I must have done, but I don't remember it being there. Probably because I never bowled that day in. But
I think Self, certainly when I started, there was always something in the wicket at Lord's which tended to sort of cloud your view a bit. But there's no doubt about it. I can remember us playing against Derbyshire and Les Jackson. In the first 5 players, he either broke or dislocated a thumb. And the ball definitely used to take off, which is one of the reasons why we weren't a particularly great batting side after Compo, because the wicket was always flying around. And another thing was, which was quite interesting, when I was captain, which was 2 years, 70 and 71, I think, I went to the groundsman, and the wickets by then had eased out much more. And I said to him, I said, is there any chance, Jim, that you can sort of freshen that wicket up for us a bit, just to leave a bit of grass on it for us? And he said, you'll get the wicket I give you, he said, which does explain something, because Surrey used to win it when they used to dictate what sort of wickets they had. Yorkshire won it a lot when they used to dictate what sort of wickets they used to have. The same with Worcestershire. And during my career, most counties that won the county championship had 4 bowlers get 100 wickets.
Yeah.
Worcestershire in 65, 66, Flavel, Caldwell, backed up by Horton and Gifford. Surrey, of course, we know who they were, and Yorkshire was the same. I can remember going to Warwickshire, and they had a bowler called Basil Bridge who could bowl. Well, if you looked at the wicket before we started to play, you'd think it was a bloody chicken run. Now we couldn't do that at Lord's. We had to play on the wickets we were given, and there's no doubt about it. During the 50s and during early 60s, there was something in the wicket.
I was looking up, who won the championships in those years, 52 to 68, right? Surrey or Yorkshire won the championship, except for 64 and 65, which is Worcester, and 61, which is Hampshire. Those two teams won it every year from 52 to 68 inclusive.
Yeah.
Going back to the Ridge, Walter,
Yeah.
it was there when I started, my first full season in 63, but the wickets weren't particularly lively. They weren't particularly quick, and they weren't particularly bouncy. So the Ridge didn't have that effect, but you knew the Ridge was there because the drainage at Lord's at that stage was poor. And if you had a lot of rain and you were off the field, you could see the water flowing across the table between the two ends. The water just flowed straight through the middle of the square. And then eventually, of course, they did get round to doing the drainage, and the ridges disappeared.
A lot of people never believed there was a ridge there. And as you say, it wasn't until we had torrential rain and the water ran down the square either side of the ridge. And there it was for everybody to see. Mossy used to get a massive number of wickets, and we played a lot of our cricket at the top end of the square early part of the season. Mossy used to get 30 wickets by then, much to Truman's disgust. He said, if only I could bowl on this wicket, Mossy, he said.
Remember one time, Clive, when the covers floated off? It's a torrential storm, and the covers floated down the ground on it. It was astonishing. The ridge was just about back of a length at the nursery end, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We used to take off one side of the ridge and keep low at the other side of the ridge.
Yeah. Did any of you play at Lord's before they put the sight screen on the pavilion?
I did.
That came fairly late. Yeah, I did as well. Yeah.
So what was
it? Didn't make a lot of difference, really.
I remember playing Lord's when there was no sight screen, and the committee room had these big windows, as you know, and you really needed the window down because it was right on line on one of the bottom wickets. And so they put the windows down, but then they put this sight screen on, and they rolled across some years later in front of the committee room. And of course, when I was a player, you couldn't see the ball because of the committee windows. And when I got in the committee, many years later, I got on the committee, and I couldn't see the cricket because they pushed the screen.
They didn't have a sight screen, I'm told, because it would have interfered with the view of the members.
Yeah.
Correct.
That's a ripper, isn't it? Imagine that. We were talking, Bugs, weren't we, just before we started here about Snowy? Yeah,
the sun was going down on the seats at the back, and we lost the ball. He got 8 for, I think.
He did. It's Snowy's career best figures against Middlesex, bowling donkey drops.
8 for bowl jobs.
Yeah. It was extraordinary because they've been out there. Barlow had been batting before Graham, before an interval, it must have been, with Brealers. And Graham got out LBW, so just staring at it, came wandering off. Never saw it. Really came in and gave him a bit of a bollocking for not wearing a cap. Then went out after the interval. Got LBW himself exactly the same way. Didn't pick the ball up. And Snowy, you twigged that if he threw it up in the air high enough, it'd come out the trees at the back there. And this fly got 8 for bowling donkey jobs.
He still loves telling that story, Snowy.
Not surprised. I'd quite like to do it the other way around. I'd quite like to try an 8-foot bowling quick. That would have been handy.
Like Fred Titmus, I would think Snowy at the other end. He would always bowl from the nursery end, and I don't ever remember him bowling from the pavilion end.
I could imagine that being right. I have a theory that the pavilion end is the end for bowlers who have a straight run, and I include you in that sport. No, I do, because as I say, the business part of your run was straight, wasn't it? And because the slope holds you not quite nicely running in straight, whereas if you have an angled run into the crease from the pavilion end, it'll throw you down the slope and throws you off balance a little bit. And conversely, from the other end, you really need an angled run for the same reason, that the slope would throw you out. So it was always quite logical for somebody with a straight run to do that.
I mean, at Lord's, the better end to bowl was from the nursery end, but the trouble is it was uphill against the wind.
Absolutely, that's why I spent most of my career there. Sport as well.
Yeah, and caught mid on and mid off.
Yeah. The one thing nobody ever said to me is, which end would you like at Lord's, Self?
I think I had my best match analysis bowling at the nursery end. I got 14 wickets in the game against Kent, and I think I bowled every ball from the nursery end. But there was a gale blowing from the east at the time.
The wind is obviously the big factor. If the prevailing wind comes over, pretty much through from the Warner stand. So that's absolutely the perfect end for a swing bowler to bowl. That's why you see Mertzer. Mertzer's an absolute master, Tim Mertzer, from the nursery end.
Massey got all his wickets from the nursery end.
That's right, he did too. You played that game, Puff, didn't you?
No, I was in the next test match, and he did me for now as well.
In the test where he got all those wickets, he only got me out once.
He did hoop it around there, though. Ted, a strange end to your career, wasn't it? You finished in what, 66?
66, yes. And then
why did you finish then?
Well, I thought I gave when I signed professional in '59. I gave myself 5 years to see what I could do, and I think I played for 7 in the end. I decided that was the time to go, to get back into the business side. And I did play this one game in '76. I got a phone call from, hadn't played since '66. I did play one game actually with Parth in '68. That's right. But other than that, when they were short, I got a phone call from Brealers, who said, "I'd like you to come and get some practice against some quick bowling. Can you play against the West Indies on Saturday? We're a bit short." So I went and played against the West Indies. And I must say, in the end, I mean, Brealers and Mike Smith both got a lot of runs. And we were the only side to beat them, actually, that year.
We had 3 in an afternoon against the Windies. Kincaid, Weeks, Butch and Brealey.
Yeah.
They're breaking their hands. And Nigel Ross broke his finger early in the summer. Gunner, who'd made his debut in '66, went on a young under-19 tour or something, and that's when Sturty came in. So we had 6 wicket keepers in a fortnight.
So they were very short.
Your final first-class act was to hit the winning runs against the West Indies in '76.
That's right. Well, I came in, I nudged my way to about 26 in the first innings, and in the second innings, we needed about 270 to win. And the two Mikes were going extremely well. I think Mike Smith got 100, and Brealers got 60 or 70, and we were coasting. And then I thought, well, I was on the committee at this time. I thought, well, I better go down and we're winning this easily. I better go down and get some champagne in the committee room for the boys here. So I trotted down to the office to get it organised. Came back up, and there was a flurry of wickets, and I'm suddenly walking in the back. I batted about number 7, I think, in that game. And I managed to lap. I think it's Padmore.
Yes.
Padmore first bounced into the tavern, and we 6-0 out. I was. But the headline in the Daily Mail said, Old Ted Nails Tourists. It's a lovely headline. I've got it somewhere.
So who was in charge in '68? You got all the figures there. 1968. It was the advent of overseas players coming. We had that year we signed Connolly, Featherstone, and the other ones we had joined Harlow, Hopkins, and Hugh Pym. But Connolly and Featherstone joined us there. Who was in charge then? Because I'd just like to know from Parth what the feeling was with these overseas players coming in. I can remember Alan Connolly coming in. I think he'd had a good year with the Aussies, and then he signed for us, and he was a bit of a beaut, wasn't he? And I don't think that Fred, JT, and Parth were that. I'm not sure, but I don't think they were that impressed. At the first team meeting we had, our pal says, "Yeah, I'll bomb you 8 overs, 2 for 16, no worries, mate." He went for 72 in his first game at Bournemouth. just hit him all around the...
I can remember Alan Connolly coming, and it was the result of George Newman as the president. And I can remember him coming up to Fred, I, and JT, and he said, "Boys, I've got some very good news for you." He said, "I've signed Alan Connolly," he said, "as our overseas player." Well, what he didn't know was that JT, myself and Fred had long discussions with Richie Benno about signing an overseas player. And Richie said to us, he said, "There's only one player you want at Lord's, fellas, and that is Neil Hawke." He said, "There is no question, Neil Hawke is the guy you want." And we should have had him as well. But George Newman, I can remember him saying to me, he said, "Peter," he said, "I sat on the end of his bed in the Wardolph Hotel, and I signed him there and there."
on more money than you and JT, wasn't it?
Yes, somewhat, yes. But that wasn't the last time that happened to me, I tell you.
There was a meeting, Parth, Fred, JT, myself, and I think Eric Russell were not perfectly happy about the financial arrangements that seemed to have been made with Alan Connolly. So a meeting was called, and we met the president, George Newman, down in the committee room, but I can't say it lasted very long before we were back out the door.
I remember hearing a story about Alan Connolly meeting Gubby, and Gubby, I didn't look at Alan Connolly's record. Wasn't very good, was it, for Middlesex?
First year, that was okay. Second year, not so good. Third year, didn't turn up.
Oh, right, that's fair enough. He said, Gubby said to him, "Alan, when you're bowling, what exactly are you trying to do?" And he said, "Pitch legging it off, Gubby." and
With
Gubby
the knuckleball. Knuckleball.
That's right, he did bowl that. Gubby said, "Well, Alan, I suggest you try pitching straighter and hitting off." That was our pal. And George Newman, I heard a story. Who told me this? Must be maybe it's Arthur Flower or somebody. George used to fiddle his expenses. I mean, wealthy man, wasn't he? Did he have a Bentley or Roller or something? George Newman.
He had a roller.
Yeah, he did. And but he fiddled his expenses, and they had to throw one back at him because he charged them £3 and 17 shillings or something for an infernally bad piece of place on the A1. Why I remember that, I don't know. What you would do is an infernally bad piece of place. I never went there myself.
He had a lovely car, that our pal, didn't he? Yeah. He bought himself a brand new scimitar.
Scimitar, yeah.
Yeah, do you remember that? He always had an auntie somewhere, didn't he? He had lots of stop off on the way to any away games.
Parth, I'm sort of a bit old ground for you and I here, but I think it's important that we talk about this. You know, we've had this conversation many times, haven't we, about this collaboration between Fred and JT and yourself. That it wasn't about Fred as a bowler or JT as a keeper, he's a slip fielder, but it was completely collaborative and everybody contributed and relied on each other. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, because we played so much together, I was at slip and JT was behind the wicket. we got to know to know the form, and we got to know exactly what he would be bowling. And I would sort of just add something that JT definitely controlled the job. Of that, there's no doubt. So if he varied in what he was going to do, it would have been down to JT. But if I can just simplify it, he would bowl the same ball for the first 3 deliveries. And if he did that, then I knew very well that the next ball was going to be slightly quicker and shorter. And I didn't stand back, but I certainly was waiting for the ball. And so I was telepathic in that, and so was JT. And if he fired the ball down the leg side at any stage, it was because JT gave him the message to bowl it.
Yeah.
He didn't think of it of his own accord. But so time and time again, it was the same over all the time. And so you got to know him.
Yeah. I asked Fred once about variations and that, and he said, he was quite honest about it. He said that my variation comes from trying to bowl the same ball 6 times in the same spot. You know, so I got natural variation.
Well, that might be the case, but all I know is there was a time when he came back from Australia after 62, 63, he was, before he even went, I don't mean 62, 63, because it was an absolute disgrace. He didn't go to Australia in 62, 63. He went to the next tour. But Fred, he bowled the same all the time. He hardly ever varied it. If he bowled a quick ball, which he did very, very occasionally, it was because JT had gave him the signal and was sitting down the leg side.
Yeah.
That happened. We were playing Glamorgan at Lord's.
Alan Rees.
And there was a little lad, Rees, I think his name was, and he was giving Fred the charge, kept coming down the wicket to Fred. And after he'd faced a couple of balls in one of the overs, JT, before Fred bowled, stood down the leg side. And Fred fired it down the leg side that Rees was way down the wicket and was stumped by a mile.
No, Sport. He wasn't.
No,
he dived. He dived and caught the bloody ball with his left hand.
Yeah.
And he was given out, handled the ball.
Yes, but that's right. And Fred was reasonably happy till he found out that handle of the ball didn't go down to the bowler.
The Fred Tipman story I love is the one against Surrey where he had a rabbit there, Roy Sweatman, the keeper of Surrey in the early 60s, and he used to knock him over as rapidly as possible. And Sweaters used to come up there, we could do all sorts of things. And he came into bat in the middle of an over, Sweatman, walked past Fred, and Fred said to him, Sweaters, he said, on your way back, ask them to send out a discipline, I've got a bit of a headache.
He used to do Kenny Barrington as well. And because the story with Kenny Barrington is that we were lucky then and that we went on tour together. So we knew each other well. There was Fred, JT, Kenny, myself. And so there was always quite a lot of banter going on. And one day, Kenny walked in and Fred was bowling. And he stood in the middle of the wicket. And he said, right, you three. He said, say what you want to say now. And then keep quiet, because I want to concentrate on my batting. And he, of course, he was looking at Fred, who was bowling, and there was JT at the wicket, and I was doing. He said, so do you mind keeping quiet? I want to concentrate on my batting. Fred only did him first ball. Well, you should have heard language. Great moments.
Harry, did you find that you could bowl differently when Fred was bowling to how you would be on your own? Could you bowl in a more attacking mode, say, or did he give you license a little bit more?
Well, he always gave me assistance, whoever was batting. That was a great thing for me with Fred. Whoever was batting, I think he knew how they played. he knew how to set fields to them. And he would always encourage me to bowl in a certain line, a certain pace to different batsmen. So that was a great help to me. So I didn't try and do anything more than bowl to a field that Fred would say, this is the best way to do it. When he stopped giving me advice, that's when I found life difficult, trying to figure out batsmen on my own and trying to bowl accordingly.
Another Fred story, Fred JT story, playing Surrey at Lords. And Percy Pocock comes out to bat and he's wearing glasses. And we've never seen Percy wearing glasses before. And Percy announced that he was seeing the ball so much better with these glasses. And about second ball, Fred rolled him over, bowled. JT said, didn't see that one quite so well, Percy.
There is a story, Walter, when Brealers first came in as captain, and Fred always had the same field. He very rarely varied his field, irrespective of the wicket. Fred is bowling at the nursery end. He's got the same field as he always had, which was backward short leg, deep square leg behind, mid wicket and mid on, and then the normal offside field, 3 there in the slip, and JT. And Fred bowled. By then, Fred was an international class bowler, and he bowled a dot ball to this boy. And Michael Brealey said, Fred, I think I'll go up to forward short leg. And Fred said, I don't want you there, captain. Next ball, dot ball again. And Brealey said, I think I'll go up the forward short leg, Fred. Who he was fielding at mid-wicket, of course. And Fred said, I don't want you there. He then bowled a third ball, and it was a dot ball. And Brealey said, I'm definitely going up there, Fred. And he goes up to forward short leg, and the next ball Fred bowls, it's a full bunger, and it goes past Brealey's head like an Exocet missile. And Brealey said, all right, Fred, you've made your point, he said.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking another of these about him, about how you would, I remember being at mid-off occasionally to him, and Brealey would try to push me back and then, or bring you up, and Fred had walk back and he'd just give it that one. So we always went back where he wanted it. He was wonderful.
He was basically, Fred was a defensive bowler. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
Now, whereas David Allen or Raymond Illingworth, if you had a Bunsen burner and the wicket was turning square, that had people round the bat all the time. Fred wouldn't. Fred would still have his normal field.
Raymond, if it wasn't turning, it'd have Berkey bowling as you
well. Absolutely, it would be.
Raymond was a defensive bowler. So I remember in a story about him where he said, I can't remember the batsman, he said, you throw it up, Raymond, he'll hit you for 6, but then you'll get him out. He said, I can get him for fewer than 6.
I was fielded in that deep square position to Fred a hell of a lot, and I found myself at mid-on at Old Trafford once with Fred bowling, and Peter Marner came in, who was a great striker of the cricket ball, hit it as hard as you see anybody. And the first ball disappeared over my head for 6, and Fred said, well, go back a bit. So I went back a bit. The next ball went over my head even higher for 6, and Fred said, better go on the edge. And the last ball disappeared way over my head at long. And JJ said to him, Fred, why the hell are you bowling half volleys? And he said, you can't have a half volley for 6, captain. But I've never seen 3 sixes in a row like that from captain Peter Marner.
Peter Marner, we talked about Snowy earlier. Snowy opened the bowling against Peter Marner once with a soap on a rope. You remember that red cricket ball soap on a rope used to get in the shower? And he opened the bowl. He opened the bowling with one of those to him. Peter Marner smashed this thing. Didn't know it was coming. Smashed it, and it left like a mound, like a pyramid of soap in the middle of his bat. And the scorer dutifully wrote down "ball disintegrated."
I think Charlie Elliott was the umpire.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. And he blew a gasket. He was not amused at all.
Parth, didn't you once walk Arthur Jepson gave you not out at the end of an over one. Arthur Jepson used to finish an over by almost giving you out, didn't he? He just used to go over like that, didn't he?
He did. He did. But it wasn't Jeppo, and I can't.
Oh, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't Jeppo, but it was at the Pavilion Inn, and I think it was Percy Pocock, I think, was bowling. Anyway, it was the last ball of the over, and it was down the leg side. I tried to sweep it. I didn't get anywhere near it. And Tommy Spencer, it was. Tommy Spencer. And you're quite right. Tommy Spencer used to throw his left arm out like that and go, oh. Well, I thought he gave me out. So I walked, and of course it was near to lunchtime. And I'm sitting just inside the door of the changing room in my chair, and the door, knock at the door, and Tommy Spencer comes in, and he said, "Excuse me, Captain." He said, "Can I have a word with Mr. Parfitt here?" Taking piss, of course. I said, he said, "Don't take the mickey out of me again. When I give you not out, do not walk off the field." I said, "I thought you'd given me out."
Who was instrumental in helping you sport when you first joined? Who did you not model yourself on? But
I mean, what I remember is basically a lack of coaching in those days. You know, Jack Robertson, I think, was coach when I joined Middlesex. Lovely, lovely man. Jack, don't come any nicer. But it seemed to be if you were good enough to play in the first team, you weren't coached. You were considered to be good enough anyway. And in fact, I'd had virtually no coaching ever. When I was about 10 or 11, my father used to take me in the nets at the end of a club match. He was umpire and I was scoring, and we'd you know, I'd bowl at him for 15 minutes. In those days, I was an off spinner, and then I'd have my turn batting, and basically he taught me as much as anything, plus the fact that I watched other players. And I was never really, well, I was certainly never coached by a professional coach in the whole of my career.
So who did you kind of extrapolate information from to incorporate into your own game?
My first year, 63, Mossy was playing, and it was in fact his last year. But Mossy was good to me, and he looked after me. And then, yeah, I mean, the other players, senior players in the side would tell me about the way certain batsmen would like to play. But as actual coaching, no.
What about you, Harry? Who would you have watched? There were quite a few leg spinners around him, weren't there?
Well, not that many around, really. No, they were either retiring or there were a couple of from overseas. But no, it's funny what Sports just said. J.D. Robertson may not have coached a lot, but what he did do for me was to give me confidence.
Yeah.
He never ever spoke to me against what I would say I'd had a bad day. He would always talk to me at the end of the day and say, you know, that was a good spell. You did bowl well. That's what you should do. And it was encouragement all the time. I didn't really get anything negative from him. And although he wasn't talking about leg spin bowling as such, he was just talking about bowling in general. And I've got to say that I like JD, and he helped me a lot in the second 11 days. Yeah,
I would reiterate that, Walter. He would always encourage if you played well. He'd always say you played well, and he would commiserate if you got your hob knocked over. But he didn't actively coach you as such. I can remember when I first started in 1956. I'm playing against Cambridge University as a 19-year-old. And my father, at lunchtime, he's he's throwing the ball to me, and I'm driving it back to him by the sight screens. And the end of lunch, and Patsy Hendren, who obviously used to be a coach and a great player for Middlesex, he came up and he stopped beside my father, and then he said to me, he said, "Young man," he said, "you're hitting the ball too much through the offside as a left-hander." My father said, "Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Hendren." And he stuck his hand in his pocket, took out a fiver, and Patsy said, "Thanks very much." And walked away. He did my old man for a fiver as easily as saying that.
I think nearly all of us picked up bits and pieces from other players and senior players. And
I think that's the important thing. That should still apply today, shouldn't it? Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I picked up an awful lot just from, it might be little things. One thing I always remember, Jeff Arnold's steady head.
Yeah.
Well, it always stuck with me that. Horse always had this rock steady head.
Yeah.
Little things that you pick out of it. Listen, guys, it's been great fun. Thanks everybody for coming on here. It's wonderful to catch up with people, and we'll see you in the very near future anyway. But Parth, you can Julie, to comb your hair now, and
I hope she's making a sandwich for my lunch, old boy.
Well, I saw her go by a minute ago with her marigolds on. So
Yeah. Yes.
she took it with those on your work. Anyway, guys, thanks ever so much, and we'll catch you soon.
Cheers.
Bye,
Thanks.
man.
Yes.